Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, there's a new team at the helm of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. What are its priorities and goals? We speak with the recently confirmed head of the division, Tom Perez. Name-brand U.S. companies played a critical role in helping Hitler come to power in Germany and in carrying out the final solution, argues author Edwin Black in Nazi Nexus. The largest estuary in the U.S. is on life support, but it seems the Chesapeake Bay may have a friend in Barack Obama. We speak with riverkeeper Fred Tutman. Also, the Free Minds Book Club and Writing Workshop, transforming young felons in the District of Columbia into poets.
Center around certain themes of feeling lonely and not connected, and wanting to be connected to their moms, and feeling that they are a big disappointment, and they want to prove to them that they can be a success.
And music by Calico Jack on the Coffee House.
Welcome to Courting Justice at the Coffee House. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice has investigated or prosecuted some of the most famous cases in American history, including the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Medgar Evers, and the police beating of Rodney King. The division enforces federal laws that prohibit discrimination on the basis of race, sex, disability, religion, and national origin. However, civil rights organizations criticized the division during the Bush administration, accusing it of failing to vigorously enforce these laws. Those same groups are now encouraged by the appointment of the new Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Tom Perez. Welcome, Tom, back to the Coffee House.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
It's so good to have you back since your appointment. You started your legal career at the Justice Department and spent a lot of time at the Civil Rights Division, and I know you left there to move to another division. But there seemed to be, at least at a certain point, almost an exodus of civil rights lawyers from the Civil Rights Division. I read someplace that between 2003 and 2007, 236 out of 350 civil rights lawyers left the division. What's your take on why that happened, if you have a thought about that?
Well, I have many thoughts on that.
Okay.
I had the privilege of working in the division under Republican and Democratic leadership. I came in in 1989 under then Assistant Attorney General John Dunn. I worked under the elder Bush. I worked under President Clinton. And I served on the hiring committee under President Bush and under President Clinton. And the good news is that the respect for career people, whether it was John Dunn or whether it was Deval Patrick, was the same. I had many cases in which we had heated discussions about what we should do. And I won some and I lost some of those discussions, but my voice was always heard. Communication and respect are the lifeblood of the Civil Rights Division and frankly any good organization. And that communication between the career staff and the non-career staff frankly broke down during the Bush administration. There was a Inspector General's report that documented the politicization of decision-making, the politicization of promotions. That report broke my heart. That was not the Department of Justice that I recall under John Dunn's watch or under Bill Clinton's watch. And it was tragic. And it broke down because people in leadership positions in the division crossed lines that should never be crossed, made decisions based on political ideology and factors that should never go into decision making. And so job one for me is restoring respect between the career staff and the non-career staff, restoring communication, and frankly restoring public confidence in the decision making by depoliticizing that decision making. And we're doing just that now.
How do you go about doing that, though?
Well, first of all, you start listening to people. I'm fond of saying that I've seldom had an original idea in my life, but I pride myself in listening to folks who've been in the front lines. And we have a remarkable cadre of career staff who have been working there, in some cases under very trying circumstances. You're correct that there was a lot of attrition during the Bush years, but many good people remained. And so what we're doing now, my first few days on the job, I visited every section to have the first of many conversations. We're embarking on a listening tour right now, in which we're going to every section to ask what's going well so that we can bottle it, and what's not going well so we can fix it. I'm having the same conversation with external stakeholders, asking people who are knowledgeable about voting or housing or employment, what should we be doing in terms of our priorities, and it's very helpful.
Well, certainly I mentioned there's a lot of excitement about you being back at the department and in charge of the department. That's definitely for sure. I mean, but it is, it's the division, I should say. But it's really a huge division, and doing research for this, there's 10 different sections, everything from voting to employment to education. I mean, how do you go about setting priorities? Are there certain divisions that you have as a priority, or do you set priorities in each one of the sections? And if you can tell us, what are some of the priorities that you've set?
I believe that the division is really the conscience of the nation, and through the laws that we enforce, we give meaning to equal opportunity and equal justice under law. And one of the things I've said frequently is we're open for business, and we're here to enforce the law, all the laws. And part of my critique of my predecessors is that they treated it like the buffet counter, where you pick the peas and you like the peas, you don't like the carrots, and so you enforce the laws you like and you don't enforce the laws you don't like. We will be enforcing the laws, all of the laws, and we'll do so independently, even-handedly. And having said that, there are areas of particular focus, 3 to be precise. We need to be prepared for Census 2010, and we need to ensure that when redistricting occurs, our voting section is ready and able to meet the increasing demand that occurs every 10 years, to make sure that redistricting occurs in a manner that's consistent with the Voting Rights Act. So that's one area of particular focus. In addition, making sure that the division, through the enforcement of fair housing laws and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, is doing its level best to protect people who are victims in the foreclosure context. The foreclosure context, the foreclosure crisis, it touches every corner of our country, but it disproportionately touches communities of color. And that's a fact. The data bears that out. And the division needs to be involved in holding lenders and servicers accountable who are preying on minority communities. So that's a second area of focus. Thirdly is hate crimes. I was a prosecutor, a career prosecutor, for the better part of a decade. I went into communities where people were seeking not simply to break bones, but to break the spirit of communities through absolutely heinous crimes. I'm ecstatic to report that we now have an additional tool, thanks to the President signing the hate crimes bill. And when you introduced at the outset the various statutes we enforce, I'm happy to report that we now, for the first time, can protect people who are in the LGBT community. That is a first for the federal government, and I'm ecstatic, because people who commit these acts of violence are equal opportunity bigots. They go after synagogues, mosques, other places of worship. They go after African Americans, Latinos. They go after people who are gay, and we need all the tools we can to prosecute them, and that's why this hate crimes bill was so important.
Now, I wanted to ask you about that. The President signed the bill, the act, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, and I know that when you were a lawyer in the division, you prosecuted, I believe, some high-profile hate crimes laws. So I want to ask you about that. I mean, what would you say to people who say, you know, we don't really need hate crimes laws because there are already laws on the books that are there to punish people who commit the substantive act. If they kill someone, there's homicide, there are first-degree murder laws that can put people away for life. If they attack someone, there are assault laws out there. What would you say to people who say, we already have those laws on the books, we have a proliferation of criminal laws already, why do we need more criminal laws?
Sure. I've certainly heard those arguments, and I respectfully but rather strongly disagree with them based on a career of being in the front lines in these cases. Hate crimes, again, they're designed not only to attack the individual, but to instill fear in entire communities in ways that are different than somebody who might assault me to take my dollar that's in my wallet. And in addition, I met with the sheriff who prosecuted the case in Laramie, Wyoming, the Shepherd case that you're referring to. That town almost went bankrupt prosecuting that one case. They're not used to having murder cases. And so this law, among other things, aside from giving the federal government additional tools, equally importantly, it provides the authority for the federal government to assist local law enforcement in the investigation of cases. So when the Shepherd case happened, if you would have called the federal government and said, a horrible incident occurred, go investigate, the answer would have been, indeed, a horrible incident occurred, we've got no jurisdiction, you're on your own. Now when the phone rings, a horrible incident occurred, the answer is, we're on it, we'll be there tomorrow, and if in the end of the day it's in the best interest of the case to prosecute it as a state murder case, then we'll do that. If it's in the best interest of the case to prosecute it as a federal hate crime, we'll do that. As a former prosecutor, I always like when I have more tools in my arsenal, and I always like when I can bring the FBI and the ATF and all of the federal law enforcement resources to bear to help my local partners. And that's what this is about.
So do you have any concern, because there are some people who think that sometimes these criminal laws are enforced disproportionately against people of color. And I know people think, well, that'll never happen with hate crimes legislation. But what about hate crimes legislation in general? Any concern you have about prosecutors using their discretion in ways that they might prosecute, for example, people of color who are accused of attacking whites with hate crimes legislation, with hate crimes laws disproportionately, as the evidence has shown they've done in other areas?
Well, that hasn't. I certainly understand the concern that you're outlining, and again, having studied the Hate Crime Statistics Act and the data that's been gathered for 20 years or so, I don't think that's a problem in this context. When I think about hate crimes, and I think about the people who are concerned that there's another penalty in place, it's seldom that the U.S. Supreme Court reaches a 9-0 decision on anything in this day and age. But hate crimes was one of those areas where this ideologically divided court reached a unanimous decision in a case out of Wisconsin and said it is entirely appropriate to enhance penalties in the hate crimes context. So I hear the concern, but I don't think there's any history of abuse of hate crimes laws by prosecutors, and I'm confident there won't be.
We have, unfortunately, just a couple of minutes left. I wanted to ask about voting rights, and you already mentioned about the census and the work you're doing. Voting Rights Act passed over 40 years ago, but still this huge concern, and in fact there have been, incidents of intimidation. The last 3 presidential elections, there have been all of these problems. Do you have to, is there anything affirmative that your division is doing to sort of make sure that those things don't happen in the future? Or do you have to kind of wait till the complaints come to you?
No, we're very affirmatively out there. So for instance, on election days, the recent elections that just occurred in November, across the country, we had monitors out in various locations across the country, and we do that every year. We have the authority to be out there proactively. So there's a combination of the proactive work, the prevention work, and obviously reacting to incidents that we learn of after the fact.
Well, unfortunately, our time is just about up. I thank you so much for joining us today. Congratulations again. Good luck. You have quite a task ahead of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Attorney General Tom Perez, for sharing your insights and vision with us. For more information about the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, visit www.justice.gov/CRT. I'm Angela Davis, and this has been Courting Justice.
This event started when we invite guest authors and poets to come into the jail. We had a poet, Washington Wizards, Eton Thomas, who's unfortunately been traded now, but he came in and he read his own poetry, which we thought was great, and all of a sudden one of the kids said, "Can you read mine?" We never even thought about it. They read his, they were so excited, all of a sudden we were like, we gotta have a poetry reading. Of course, and we have to invite the community.
This is a poem I wrote since I came home when I was doing my internship with Free Minds. It's called The Streets Watch by Jermaine. You got your eyes on the corner thinking you see cops, but whole time you too blind cause really the streets watch. Every move you be making, thinking your peeps clocking, you ain't hipped it on the rip, it's only the streets watching. Why? You was child and he raised you here. So the streets gon' keep you on the side till your days is near. The streets don't ever wanna hear you say I made it through. He just wants you to have a seed so that he could raise them too. The streets will promise the girls clothes and money that you won't never see. He laughing, cause he think it's funny, you the dummy he know won't never leave. When you finally realize this ain't for you, dog, that's when the streets stop. But until then, you can't win, cause yeah, the streets watch. That's it.
Our program serves about 300 young men. And what we are is a nonprofit that works with teenaged boys at the DC jail who are charged and incarcerated as adults. So they're in the adult system for felony charges. We believe that books and writing can change lives. We do a book club, just like a regular book club where we choose books and we discuss. And it's all based on themes that our young men can relate to, about life on the streets and changing. And then we do creative writing, so we do poetry workshops. We then follow them as they're transferred to federal prison, where we send them books, continue to send them books, set them up with a pen pal, and work on their reentry when they come home. When they come home, they're in the reentry phase, and we help, number one, get back into school and jobs. So it's a whole circle.
How did it get like this? Things ain't been like this. Thinking it got like this once Bush got here. They got wars with the money, but the poor still hungry. Man, I used to love this country, but this country's getting ugly. And why would I go to a fight for some country that shackle me up, shit me out, sleep me on some concrete? Title 16 is the law that says when you're 16, you can be tried as an adult. I thought robbery is supposed to be a crime. They over there fighting this war, taking over from Afghanistan. Democrats, Republicans, man, that's for the ropey, man. What's good with my brothers in the hood that's been smuggled down? A donkey or an elephant has never been seen in the hood. Only rats, raccoons, and pit bulls in the hood. With roaches in the house, about a 3-room house, 8 folks in the house. Let's say 2 to a room plus the couple on the couch. And if that know the plumber, you won't even help them out. It's not the land of the free, we're the land of the false.
It's really the books. They read about somebody. If Nathan McCall can do it and it makes me want to holler, they have a roadmap that they can do it. And that is the key, is the books and the reading about others who have done it, who've gone before, met these challenges and succeeded. And then the writing, the feelings, the emotions these kids go through in a violent prison, in families that have forgotten about them. Through writing, they can express their feelings of loneliness, anger, instead of resorting to the cliche of picking up a pen instead of a gun. It's really true.
And like we got guys who came home and got their GEDs while I was locked up in 07. I got my GED when I was 17. And I'm supposed to be going to college in January. And accepted 30 minutes freedom now.
Most of the themes of the writing of our member center around certain themes of feeling lonely and not connected and wanting to be connected to their moms and feeling that they are a big disappointment and they want to prove to them that they can be a success. The feeling of not having a father, as you can imagine, most of our members have never had a father in their life. But they also, many have young children themselves, so they want to be a better parent to their kids than they had themselves.
This poem was written by me. It was dedicated to my daughter when I was locked up. So this for my daughter right here. Don't be like, I can't explain on how bad I feel inside. Waking up in the cell, sometimes daddy cry. And that don't make your father any less of a man. I love you with all my heart. And when you get older, you will understand that your dad made a lot of wrong choices. I think I'm going crazy because I keep hearing you and your mom voices saying, baby, stay strong. Daddy, please don't be away long. It brings tears to my eye when I hear the pain of your mother's voice on the phone. It hurts me to know that I left y'all in the world alone. But I told your mother I'm ready to make a change. For my daughter, I'm a man up and turn my back on the street game. Plus, I must say your mother's strong for holding the fort down. I once was a boy, but daddy's a man now.
We don't know of anyone that's doing youth in the adult system exactly like ours, but we're spreading the word. It's spread to, we've done trainings in Baltimore, Maryland. We want to get the word out so everybody can use this method because it's very easy and it's very effective.
Welcome to Writer's Block at the Coffee House. In the early 20th century, only a minority of Zionists wanted to create a separate nation state for Jews. It took Hitler and the Nazis to transform Zionism from a cultural movement into a nationalist juggernaut. Award-winning author Edwin Black has devoted much of his life as an investigative journalist to exploring the origins of the Nazis' racial theories and how Hitler constructed his machinery of death. The trail of both, it seems, leads back here to America. Drawing on a number of his prior works, particularly the acclaimed IBM and the Holocaust and War Against the Weak, Edwin Black is out with a new book, Nazi Nexus, and he's naming names: Ford, Rockefeller, GM, and others. Welcome, Edwin, back to the Coffee House.
And thank you for having me.
Your own personal story, that of your mother in particular, prompted you to go down this path, didn't it?
Well, originally my parents were Holocaust survivors. My mom was on a train and was
A train to
Treblinka, and was pushed out of the small grate by her mom, and was buried in a mass grave. And my father came upon her. He was a partisan and saw her legs sticking out of the snow and pulled her out from a mass grave. And together they lived in the woods for 2 years, kind of like this movie Defiance. And I always thought that it was my goal and mission to explain why this happened. And of course, I always went beyond just the bullets and the rifle barrels and tried to explain exactly how it was facilitated. And I've written various books. I wrote Transfer Agreement, which involved Henry Ford and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I did War Against the Weak, that traced American eugenics and its Carnegie sponsorship and Rockefeller's sponsorship to Nazi eugenics. I did IBM and the Holocaust, which of course documented how IBM consciously organized and co-planned the Holocaust with the Third Reich. And I did GM and the Nazis, which explained how General Motors, working through secret subsidiaries, took Hitler's killers off of horseback and put them into trucks and cars. And while I did all of those separately, when I looked at them, when I connected the dots, and that is the mantra of this book, once I connected the dots, I found out that American corporate complicity actually shaped the size and scope of the Holocaust. Now,
Well, let's go through it one by one.
Okay.
Let's start with Ford, which was the topic of the transfer agreement. Henry Ford is best known as the person who brought to the masses the automobile, but he's also known as a virulent anti-Semite, the author of the International Jew, and was someone who was honored by Hitler. But could it be really said that the Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford facilitated the rise of the Nazis?
Well, I think it's important to not say that they facilitated the rise of the Nazis. This I would never say. But what Henry Ford contributed that the Nazis never had before was the concept of political anti-Semitism. In other words, this was not just an in-group and an out-group. We don't like you because you're a different religion. We hate Jews. This was the concept of the international Jewish conspiracy. So you have to say, and I included it because although everyone knows about Henry Ford now in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, they did not when I originally published the transfer agreement. So you must ask yourself, where would Adolf Hitler's war against the Jews be if he could not claim that there was no good Jew, that every Jew was out to deceive and dominate the world through a control of the media, of the government, of banks to cause wars, create depressions, et cetera, et cetera. That shaped the very concept of Hitler's Hitler's anti-Semitism. And how do we know? Not because you say so, and not because I say so, because Hitler said so. Hitler said, "You are my hero." Hitler had pictures of him and Ford on the International Jew, and Hitler looked up to Henry Ford as the model.
But it was another car maker, Alfred Sloan of General Motors, who perhaps contributed more directly and more significantly to the actual effectiveness of the Nazi machine.
That's correct. What Henry Ford contributed to the theory, Alfred Sloan contributed to where the rubber meets the road. You have to ask yourself, and the Nazi Nexus is about the indispensable involvement of American corporations. Where would Hitler's Holocaust be on horseback? Because the German army and the German nation was a horse-drawn country until Alfred Sloan and General Motors, which owned Opel, brought mass production of automotive technology to the Third Reich.
But we always thought it was the Volkswagen.
Yeah, and you were wrong. It was actually Opel. It was not Mercedes, it was not Benz, it was not Henry Ford's motor company. It was Opel that was the largest supplier of trucks and cars to the German military.
And Opel was a GM company?
Of course it was. And Alfred Sloan controlled it through secret interlocking boards and executive committees. And General Motors made the Blitz truck for the Blitzkrieg and made it possible for Adolf Hitler to pre-position truck parts along the Polish border just before the start of World War I on September 1st, 1939.
World War II.
World War II.
But to what extent, I mean, this is business, right? They're building cars. The Germans want cars, the Americans want cars.
Mark, this is not business, this is genocide. When you create a wherewithal for a genocidal maniac to war against all of humanity, not just the Holocaust.
But at what point in time did they have the knowledge that that indeed was what Hitler was about?
From 1933, from January 30th, 1933, the entire world was abuzz with the notion that Hitler wanted to destroy the Jewish community and conquer Europe. And the proof of that is that's why Sloan kept it a secret. That's why Sloan didn't want the American people to understand that he was secretly sympathizing with the Nazis. Now this is different. Sloan didn't do it for the money. Sloan believed in Hitler. Sloan actually believed in fascism. Sloan was against Roosevelt the way some people today are against Obama.
He was a leader of the Liberty Lobby, is that right?
He was a leader of the Liberty Lobby and many other racial, anti-Jewish, anti-labor groups. And Sloan had the idea that corporations should run countries. Countries should not run corporations. So you have to ask yourself, without the Ju-88 bomber from the air, the torpedoes on the sea, and the Blitz truck on the land, where would Hitler's Holocaust have been?
All right, now let's talk about IBM briefly. IBM at the time was a rather young company. It produced a remarkable machine for the day called the Hollerith, and that was technology that became shared with the Nazis. How did they put it to use?
It wasn't it was not a young company. It was a well-entrenched company. It had the global monopoly since 1890 on information technology. No one had it but them. Anyone who did have it had to license it from them. You are talking about the birth of the information age. It was not in Silicon Valley, it was in Berlin in 1933, and if you ask what does that mean, it means the individualization of statistics. And it was IBM that went to Hitler and said, we are the solutions company, what solutions do you want? And IBM, through this Hollerith punch card, which stored information in the rows and columns the way a computer stores it in a hard drive, was able to allow Hitler to facilitate and accelerate all 6 phases of the Holocaust: the identification of the Jews, the expulsion from society, the confiscation of their assets, the deportation, the ghettoization, and even the extermination. It was IBM that consciously allowed an IBM customer site in every concentration camp.
Wait, you're saying that IBM was present in every concentration camp?
Not only was an IBM customer site in every concentration camp, it was right outside the gate in Dachau. It was right across from the IG Farben director plant in Auschwitz II. Not only that, they actually serviced these machines on site in Auschwitz, in Buchenwald, in Dachau, in all the various concentration camps where they had either machines, a card sorting operation, or a other type of processing plant.
The serial numbers that are...
The Auschwitz tattoo began as an IBM number. There's a name for this, and it's called the Hollerith Abteilung. That was the IBM customer site in every concentration camp. Find me one where they didn't have an IBM customer site, just one.
Let's talk a little bit about the issue of eugenics, which was the topic of War Against the Weak, which is essentially a theory that you can affect the gene pool by selecting the preferred and separating out the less preferred and improving generation after generation by picking what's better. And the Nazis adopted that, I gather, in order to create a master race.
It is not a theory that you can affect the gene pool. It's a theory that you can kill the gene pool. And if you kill or eliminate, and the key word was eliminate, 10% of the gene pool at a time, which in America was about 14 million people, the theory was, the approach was, that eventually by cutting off millions of Americans who did not conform to the blonde, blue-eyed stereotype of the American eugenicist, that you would eventually have just them.
This was through forced sterilization. How prevalent was that in America?
There were some 65,000 people in the United States forcibly sterilized against their will, many without their knowledge in some 27 states. They had marriage prohibition, they had concentration camps, that they had marriage voiding, and they proposed gas chambers. When I say they proposed gas chambers, I'm saying they proposed them 10, 15, and 20 years before Adolf Hitler ever put one in Nazi Germany. In fact, the first eugenic sterilization law that proposed gas chambers was in Ohio in 1908. And once again, it was Hitler who said America has got the key to the master race. And so it was the Carnegie Institution that gave Hitler the idea that he could medicalize his pre-existing anti-Semitism and nationalism and turn it into a science. And the science was that human beings were that some humans were subhuman, were bacterial. And who said it first and who said it best? Oliver Wendell Holmes, when he said that 3 families of Carrie Buck's family could be sterilized by the same concept as vaccination.
Now we're almost out of time, but I need to ask you about a comment you made in the introduction to Nazi Nexus, which was dripping with sarcasm, but you thanked the U.S. Holocaust Museum for refusing to include any of the information that you've uncovered regarding the complicity of American corporations in the Holocaust. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you read that very well. That's correct. I do owe them a debt of gratitude for keeping this out of their museum. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here discussing this with you. None of this information is in the Holocaust Museum. There's nothing on Henry Ford, and I'm not talking about buried in the library. Go to the exhibit. There's nothing on General Motors. There is nothing on Rockefeller and Mengele. There is nothing on, and the IBM machine, which I originally saw there, has been removed. It's in storage. They said too many people were looking at it, and now they've replaced that with an older model with just a small IBM decal. And they have an unwritten taboo there, and that is that nothing about American corporations can ever be shown in that museum for complicity with the Third Reich.
Well, many thanks to Edwin Black for so doggedly pursuing such a horrific past. It all comes down to a pointed reminder of the amorality of corporate power and what some people will do for the almighty dollar. I'm Mark Cohen, and this has been Writer's Block.
Welcome to 21st Century Life here at the Coffee House. What does it take to save the Chesapeake Bay from ecological ruin? As crab and oyster numbers plummet and the bay becomes a virtual dead zone each summer, Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. recently admitted that their 25-year plan to restore the nation's largest estuary was in fact failing. Solution? President Barack Obama surprised many bay cleanup advocates with an executive order that commits the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to an unprecedented leadership role and creates a yearly public test of progress. But will this actually save the bay? Here to discuss this issue is Fred Tutman, Chief Executive Officer of the Patuxent Riverkeeper, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Fred, welcome to the Coffee House.
Thanks.
So, briefly, tell us what is killing the Chesapeake Bay. Why is it dying environmentally? What's the problem?
Mike, the bay is being savaged by all sorts of inputs, wastewater plants, nutrient sources from urban development, pollutant runoff from all kinds of sources, direct discharges, frankly, from polluting industries, all kinds of stuff. And oddly, there's this fog surrounding it where folks think that picking up beer cans and other stuff is somehow going to clean any of that up. So part of what's killing the bay is, I think, public ignorance or apathy about what the true underlying causes and sources of these problems are.
But if you talk to the politicians, they'll tell you they're not, apathetic. I mean, since the 1960s and 70s, there have been calls to save the bay, and the politicians have had all these plans and deadlines. There was a deadline for 2000, the year 2000, to clean up, and 2010, and still the bay continues to wither and lots of problems. What has been the political problem? Why haven't the politicians followed through?
Well, politicians do what is expedient, and more often than not. And that's not to say there aren't really good folks of good intention who really hope to get something done. But the truth is that the things that are savaging the bay are institutionalized, they're profit-based interests, and it would be suicide, I think, for many politicians to take these interests on.
These include developers, farmers. I mean, it's us, basically. It's
sure.
a modern American society.
As much money as we're trying to spend to clean this mess up, there's even more money being spent to wreck it in the first place. And while we can find all kinds of money to build huge highways and bridges and other kinds of stuff, it's rough to find $1.98 to even try and attempt restoration.
But you said that for many politicians, this would be sort of political suicide to take on these strong interests. But then May 12th, 2009, politician Barack Obama comes along, surprises many people. Not everyone knew it was coming, not even the governors of some of the states closest to the Chesapeake Bay. And Obama says, I'm gonna bring some more clout to this fight. What did he say with his executive order?
What he said is we're going to change the culture or institutional culture surrounding this Bay cleanup. And the EPA, rather than being an outpost agency, the Bay program in Annapolis that's observing and monitoring and kind of kibitzing, is now going to assume, or basically the overarching agency that runs that program, the EPA, is now going to assume the role of a leader. They're actually going to set benchmarks. They're going to convene all of the federal agencies, or at least cabinet agencies that have some piece of the puzzle. They're going to come up with better and more objective benchmarks in order to measure how we're really doing, because in all honesty, people are really confused about this. It's like the stock market. They wait for a report card to come out every year, and it's kind of like a game. Will it be up? Will it be down? As though somehow these things are kind of up to the winds or up to sunspots or something like that. The truth is, after all of this enterprise for all these years to clean this Bay up, it ought to be a national embarrassment that it's just sinking lower and lower. So there are two possibilities here, right? One is this considerable hypocrisy socially about what we're really doing to clean the Bay up. What we're really doing is spending a lot of money on stuff that doesn't have a core impact on water quality. I guess another possibility is we're working on all the wrong stuff, or some of the wrong stuff. So this executive order charts a course, a fairly daring course, because there is an enculturation around these issues. People actually have gotten rather comfortable with the idea that we have to fund this stuff and we're going to do buffer restoration and, like I mentioned, trash cleanups and all this stuff. These don't seem to be having the desired effect, but we're also not harvesting money from the folks that have wrecked it. We're also not funding these with recovery of money from those who are the institutional violators.
Now, going back to the politics, you've said, I mean, one of the things the Obama executive order does is it sort of tightens these timelines and these lookbacks. The politicians, the state politicians in the last few years have set 10-year deadlines. So we're going to do better every 10 years. And Obama takes a different course on that.
Well, he does. He's ramping up the accountability. Accountability is a word that appears throughout the order. Incidentally, performance-based is also in there quite a bit. The idea is that we're going to try and find out what's really working as opposed to what's just kind of turning the motor. I mean, let's be clear, the federal government does not, in the normal course of affairs, direct the states in how they're pursuing their cleanup efforts. The potential of this, I guess, is twofold. One, it brings increased energy and synergy and coordination to the federal role in cleaning up some of these problems and approaching some of these long-held issues, including ensuring that the federal agencies themselves, DOD agencies, Department of Interior and others, are using practices that are going to minimize the footprint of the federal government on them. That's one side of it. The other side is, too, it offers an opportunity, an oversight board, it's called the Federal Leadership Committee, I believe, that will actually shed more light on what the states actually are doing.
So that's the head of the EPA, the Department of Agriculture. These
Security.
are all Homeland Security.
Right.
All these federal agencies will appoint a high-level person, and a committee that will oversee and coordinate with the states.
Yeah, and I guess the question that comes up, and in the environmental community, people say, well, is this just talk? Is this just more puffery? Is an executive order worth the paper that it's printed on, or the cyber text that's on your screen? And I think the thing that's interesting here is this is actually a different brand of rhetoric. Okay, this is actually not ratifying the status quo. It's not saying, wow, the Fed's going to come and help you guys do what you're already doing. It acknowledges openly, whatever the world you guys are doing, it ain't working. We need to take a different look at these problems, find a different way of benchmarking them, use new, and I think the term that's used is the next generation of strategies in order to approach these problems. It offers the potential, too, because remember, there are lots of vectors that the states have in terms of interacting with the Fed. It offers the opportunity that's more synchronicity, more coordination on many different fronts. I mean, ag, for example,
but I mean,
is one of those agencies.
if you look at these state governors, they'll say the same words: coordination, interaction, cooperation, same sort of buzzwords. I guess the question is, where's the stick? I mean, you got a 64,000 square mile watershed. This is a really big place, and it's doing really poorly. Obama steps in. He's got an executive order. Where's the stick? What happens if the states don't get it together and the Bay doesn't get better? Who pays?
Well, we'll see what the stick is. I mean, the potential that's there and the promise that's being made, or the commitment that's being made in this executive order, is that the stick is the full weight of the cabinet agencies that the president controls will now be used to come up with a directed strategy that has a central leadership core that is directed towards using performance-based solutions in order to make something happen that hasn't happened before, a central strategy. Because remember, we have all of these jurisdictions that have signed this Chesapeake Bay Agreement. Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania's in there as well. And they're not really working together. In fact, sometimes they're even creating lawmaking that's in conflict with one another. So it provides some central mechanism to oversee what these folks are doing, see what works, interact with these places in order to get more bang for the buck, so to speak. And also, it doesn't disable the existing Chesapeake Bay program, the EPA interest that's already operative in the area. It actually gives it a new lease on life in a way. It actually says, hey, we're actually going to have you guys working on stuff in a whole different context. You're not just advisors, you're part of the leadership cadre that's directing the strategies that are favored, that are supposed to be used.
Now, in many environmental battles, and including more recently the battle to save the Chesapeake Bay, the courts have become important. Now, political bodies can say anything, general assemblies can pass laws, but they don't always follow through, and it requires that advocates then go to court to hold people accountable. You've said that you believe that this Obama executive order might actually create a legal court atmosphere very different than the Bush administration that could actually help with the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. What do you mean by that?
Well, interesting, because it implies, the executive order implies, that the regulatory regime of the federal government is basically on the side of the advocates for these water quality resources.
Big change from the Bush administration.
Huge change, much friendlier environment to those of us who care about actual results, real outcomes, seeing existing laws enforced. The executive order is very specific about ramped up and improved enforcement and utilization of the Clean Water Act, for example, which is barely referenced a lot of the time, at least state action. The states really do, like I said, what's expedient, what's in the budget, what they can do. They're trying to balance the equities, and it's really hard when you're balancing something if there's a gold standard. The gold standard here being clean air, clean water, open space, all of these grand environmental things that we've come to expect that we're not getting. Those are gold standard. If you're talking about balancing in those realms, there's no such thing, right? Balancing would mean that you have a little bit of everybody's posture in there. So it's either clean or it isn't, is my point.
And you believe this executive order will help us see what is clean and what isn't clean. And I wanted to ask you, the executive order that Barack Obama issued on May 12th also talks about climate change adaptation. It says that climate change is coming. I mean, it declares it. The climate is changing. It's going to affect the Chesapeake Bay. What does Obama want us to do in terms of this word adaptation?
Well, it intends to wrap the acknowledgement of climate change as a real factor, not voodoo, not something that's kind of fringe thought. It's a complete reversal from the prior administration's view, which either didn't mention it at all or tended to try and argue with the science. It actually suggests, the executive order suggests, that we're now going to wrap in the acknowledgement of climate change factors into the decision making, and into the planning, into the framework for determining what the environmental future will be for our
And how might that be
bay.
a factor?
Well, I think it's pretty foreseeable in a lot of this. In fact, Maryland has already acknowledged that there are waterfront areas that are likely to be inundated in the foreseeable future due to increased sea rise, more severe storm events. I guess
that could affect where you plant trees and where you restore areas, in other words.
Oh, certainly, particularly if you're talking about a real estate market that is very fond of waterfront property. Inundated property is probably not a very commercially viable proposition. It certainly hasn't been in some of those areas that have already been inundated. I mean, Katrina, I think showed us that. But the truth is, we haven't stopped doing that stuff. We're still putting places, houses and shopping centers and other developments in floodplains, in swamps or wetlands, in ravines, in sensitive areas. We haven't gotten the message that not only is this bad for public health and safety, it's bad for our ecosystem. It's actually disrupting, it's disturbing the most sensitive lands in our midst.
Now, Fred Tutman, you grew up on the Patuxent River, a tidal river, the Chesapeake Bay. You've been an advocate for the Bay for a long time. I sense that you're optimistic. It's hard to find a lot of optimism recently on Chesapeake Bay restoration because the news hasn't been great. you believe this is going to make a difference, Barack Obama's executive order?
I am hopeful that it will make a difference. I mean, I'm a realist. I've been around long enough. I'm old enough to know that I've been disappointed more than once. What I'm hearing is someone speaking truth. We're not speaking about truth to power. We're hearing power speak some truth. And that's very exciting because it's a truth that I firmly believe is genuine. And I think it's well-intentioned. And it sets the groundwork for the work that those of us who are advocates in water quality areas, so, you know, I think our work will find a friendly forum.
Now, you've said that, and we only have a minute left, but you've said that this executive order actually came as a surprise to many people. Some of the state governors didn't see it coming.
I don't think, I mean,
or at least as quickly.
My theory is they didn't, first of all, haven't read it yet because it's more the fog. Oh, well, the Fed's going to bring us lots of money. Well, the order doesn't say that, actually. It says more oversight. It doesn't say more money. I don't know that the state governors were expecting this. I think they were expecting some announcement, but I don't think they knew what was in it. I think they expected something that was kind of a platitude. If you listen to what they're saying at the state level, I think Maryland's governor said, oh, they'll be bringing lots of dough. I'm thinking, well, where'd you find that? It's not in the order. So I think it'll be a while. I think once they realize that it comes with oversight, I don't think people will be nearly as thrilled. I don't think they like federal oversight in any other area that I can think of. I think that's not something that's really welcome to the table.
Well, a big thanks to Fred Tutman. Will Barack Obama be remembered as the U.S. president who finally helped rescue the Chesapeake Bay? Time will tell. But time itself, it's clear, is running out on this American treasure. I'm Mike Tidwell, and this has been 21st Century Life.
You can hear the guns go off, not so very far away. Patrol boats running with the tide. Just pray to God that your daddy's safe away. We don't have cash to pay another fine, and it's a cold wind that blows where the oyster dredges go. It's a mighty tough way to make a dollar. It's a hard, hard road, trudging for white gold, finding your fortune on the water. Well, I was just 18 when your dad and I first spoke. By 20 we had said our wedding vows. That first winter season we had paid off on the boat. Second season out we bought the house. Then it came on lean and the war came in between. Bushel just don't bring in what it used to. And the lawmen come and say we can't trudge here anyway. But at night we'll oyster anywhere we choose to. And it's a cold wind that blows where the oyster dredges go. It's a mighty tough way to make a dollar. It's a hard, hard road, trudging for white gold, finding your fortune on the water. Someday we'll buy the store where they sell the dredging gear, the trade will keep us filled and well fed. And each and every night we can wish ourselves good cheer. Climb the staircase safely to our bed. We'll set a lamp alight in the window every night. Say a prayer for souls out on the river. But till those dreams come true, pray all those guns can do is shoot a few more gray hairs on your mother. You can hear the guns go off not so very far away. Patrol boats are running with the tide. Just pray to God that your daddy's safe away. We don't have cash to pay another fine.